Hey there! I just got back from Rivian's Autonomy Day, and while I was there, I got a chance to talk to a lot of the engineers behind the really cool autonomy tech that they talked about. And there's a fire hydrant of information to go through, so let's get started. Before I get too far into it, I just want to give a really big shout out to the various engineering teams at Rivian. They're a really cool bunch of people who are extremely passionate about what they do, and we're very excited to show us everything they've been working on for the last few years, and it's a lot, so let's get into it. The first big one is UHF, Universal Hands-Free. This has been something that we've been asking for in the Rivian community for a long time. The geo-locked highways are a thing of the past. The system will finally work on any road that has even reasonably marked lanes. And that'll be a huge departure for those of us that live in places that have non-divided highways, or even just using it on certain longer stretches of city streets. Though it is worth noting that things like traffic lights and stop signs aren't part of the system yet, you'll have to slow down and stop for those situations. This is more of just a cruising down the road sort of a thing. To be clear, the system is capable of recognizing stop signs and traffic lights. We actually got a demo of the system doing exactly that with the point-to-point system. We'll come back to that. But they wanted to hone that in a little bit more and make sure that that is rock solid before it makes it into our vehicles. Universal Hands-Free will be coming to all of our R1 Gen 2 vehicles later this month. And you better believe when that comes out, I will be doing all of my usual very rigorous testing. I'll be seeing exactly how it behaves, what it does, what it doesn't do, pushing it to its limits, because we got to find out exactly how this works under the hood. Okay, the next two big things they talked about that were insanely cool is point-to-point driving. That's what they're calling their answer to Tesla's FSD. And wow, it's actually pretty cool. It still is a little bit rough around the edges, but honestly, for a first draft, it's looking really good. And this was just a preview engineering build that we were looking at. Before I go too far into that though, little side note, if you're interested in buying a Rivian and you find these videos to be informative or interesting, use my referral code down below. You get up to 500 points in the Rivian Gear Shop, and you'll also get free charging, which is pretty great. So onto the point-to-point system, I'm gonna do a full video of this, so make sure that you're subscribed so you can get the full deep dive on it. But just as a brief overview, it was surprisingly good for where it's at. They took us on a small test loop near their office, and honestly, the system did pretty well, especially for the first version that they're showing to the public. I didn't observe any twitchiness, and it seemed pretty confident in what it was doing. It drove very smoothly. There were two disengagements on my drive. One where it tried to run a red stoplight, and another situation where there was a whole bunch of traffic that was backing up and it wasn't entirely sure what path it should take when other cars were sort of veering out of the lane to line up for the right turn that we were going to take. But overall, it did pretty well. The UI elements aren't quite developed either, so there's definitely still work to be done. But for a first draft, I'm a believer. They're moving quickly and it looks like their product is gonna be pretty great. I'll do a whole deep dive video on this, so make sure you're subscribed to see that. The next one is huge, R2 Autonomy. And wow, there's a lot to talk about and a lot that's new with R2. So much so that I actually had to write down a list behind camera to remember all of the stuff that they talked about. Starting off the list strong was probably the biggest surprise of Autonomy Day. Rivian built their own system on a chip specifically for their own autonomy and AI workloads to handle their large driving models, and it looks pretty cool. It's being built on TSMC's 5nm process. For context, if you don't know who TSMC is, they're a giant in the chip manufacturing industry. Apple uses them, for example, for the Apple Silicon products. LiDAR is the next big change for R2, and the way they have it integrated looks really smooth. You wouldn't know that it's there necessarily if no one pointed it out to you, which is quite the feat for getting it shaped in there. We haven't seen that much. Also, video was very quick to point out that it's camera safe. It won't fry your camera like some LiDARs on other auto manufacturers' vehicles that we've seen recently. The LiDAR is a very interesting one because it's going to enable some of the other higher features that are farther down the road. For example, eyes off, hands off driving, and later what they're calling personal level 4, where you can send the vehicle to run an errand for you. For example, go pick up the kids from school or something like that. Very interesting where they're looking in the future. We're certainly a ways from that though. One thing that was a surprise to me too is the cameras are actually different from what we have on R1 Gen 2. They're fairly similar, but not the same, but we'll go more into that on the deep dive video. They also got rid of the sonar sensors. These are just used when you're parking and you need to see objects that are close to you. Instead of using sonar, they now have dual mode radars on each corner that can operate in a short range mode to detect how close you are to objects around you. To me, this feels like a cost cutting and design simplicity measure, but I don't think it should work any less effectively than the sonars do. It's probably a solid choice for consolidating components and making things a little bit more simple. And the big overall picture I'm taking away from here is there are a lot of tweaks that they made from the R1 Gen 2 system. There are very few shared components between the two. That said, that doesn't mean the R1 Gen 2 is immediately going to become obsolete, because while there are a lot of differences, they also share a lot of commonalities that will allow them to run similar, if not the same software for a long while. But I'll get more into that on the deep dive video because, like I said, the stuff for R2 deserves its own deep dive with all of the things that I got from the engineers. Now, the big elephant in the room is pricing. That's something that I and probably a lot of you were also concerned about as well. And I'm happy to say, I feel like they knocked it out of the park with pricing. $2,500 for an outright purchase of all of the advanced autonomy features, as well as a $50 a month option for monthly subscribers. This is a huge undercut to Tesla's FSD that costs, I think, $8,000 for an outright purchase if you do it today. And obviously the system isn't quite as capable yet, but it's a really good entry point to get people in the door. One big thing with this that I really appreciate that they did is they renamed this subscription service to just Autonomy Plus. That's a lot easier to manage than what they were calling it before, which is Rivian Autonomy Platform for the basic features and Rivian Autonomy Platform Plus for the subscribed. Just Autonomy Plus is a lot more manageable, so thank you for doing that. As far as what's included with that, we don't necessarily know exactly yet, but what my understanding is that basic lane centering will always be for free. But universal hands-free, point-to-point, and possibly future parking features will be all part of that Autonomy Plus subscription. That will be starting March of next year. The last big one was Rivian Assistant, and the demo was really cool for this. It demonstrated the ability to link to personal contexts like a calendar invite, changing the time for an appointment, understanding text messages, but it also demonstrated a deep understanding of where it's operating. It's in a vehicle. It understands the state of charge. It understands your drive modes. It can access the cameras, things like that. And that provides a very good holistic operating domain. And that's honestly what I was hoping for. What I was surprised by, however, is how it works. There are multiple different backends that it can choose from depending on what your request is. So I'm curious about the Google integration because we heard about Google calendar stuff,
yeah,
possibly texting. So how does that work? Is that like a direct sign in with Google? Is this Gemini in the background?
So the entire platform is kind of multi-model, multi-LLM. We have a variety of models that we use under the hood. So for example, there's Rivian made models on board. We use an assortment of kind of vendor models on the cloud as well. And I think that's what kind of really enables us to use the right tool for the right action, right? Not every model is gonna be the best at a specific thing. And this orchestration layer that we've built really allows us to make sure that we're picking the right one. So one thing that I personally love is that because we have that architecture, some things that you're doing will be super fast because we can use the models on board. So, hey Rivian, set the temperature to 73. So that was instant because that actually didn't even have to use anything in the cloud. We have a model on board that's able to understand that, oh, this is something I can understand with what I know about the car. Let me just do that immediately. And then maybe you say something like, hey Rivian, it's actually way too hot in here. Everyone's too hot. Can you do something about that? that's more conversational. It's not going to be able to necessarily understand that with what we have on board right now. So we can use our cloud agent to pick the right model to be able to understand what that is, and then also execute that pretty quickly.
On R1, Gen 1, and Gen 2 vehicles, many requests will be handled on the cloud, but some will be handled locally, depending on what kind of thing you ask it.
So we will have kind of offline support for a section of commands. And as I was talking about the architecture, as we kind of scale compute on our vehicles, we're going to be able to kind of move things around, right? Like if we feel that we have the right kind of tool set on board with our models and compute, we'll move certain commands on offline, and then we'll be able to move things online as we need. So obviously things like Google Calendar, you're always going to need to go to the cloud, but things like vehicle controls, you can do them all on board, right? So
that makes a lot of sense.
I'm assuming that more requests will be handled on vehicle on the Gen 2 than the Gen 1. I'll definitely have to do some testing on this, but we do know that the infotainment computer on Gen 2 does have a bit more AI processing power than Gen 1. Whether this is actually used in Rivian Assistant, I'm not sure. What we do know is in the R2, the infotainment system has about 100 TOPS of dedicated AI processing power so that it can handle most, if not all, of Rivian Assistant's queries on device without going to the cloud, which is super cool. And of course, when all of this is coming out, I will do a lot of testing to see what it's capable of and try and determine when it uses local requests and when it goes to the cloud. So stay tuned for that when it comes out next year. But all in all, Rivian Autonomy Day was huge. There were so many really big announcements, and it was a big day for Rivian. It all seems very promising, and I can't wait to see what comes next. But what you can bet your bottom dollar is that I will be testing everything very thoroughly, starting with universal hands-free coming later this month, which is going to be fantastic. And don't forget to subscribe because the deep dive on R2 hardware and the point-to-point driving system are coming. There's a lot to talk about. Hey there, I just got back from, wait, am I actually recording? That would be good to know. Yes, I am. Oh no, we're off to a good start. Damn it.